everyone, Anarch here. So, this is another installment in the series that I'm calling Anarch Abridged, where I just sit down and talk to the camera for a little while. And today's topic is going to be technology, or really more specifically, whether technology is good or bad. And I mean that in the sense that there has been a long discussion up until this point about the role of technology in revolution. So I want to address two different conceptions which I think are incorrect conceptions before I move into what I think is the correct conception. And these two conceptions are anarcho-primitivism, or some form of primitivism, and productivism. So, as usual, I will explain what I mean by both of those. So, when I say primitivism, what I'm talking about is a desire to return to the quote-unquote primitive state of nature, a desire to return to some way of living which uses no high technology, which sort of tries to return us to a state before the agricultural revolution. And this is exemplified by thinkers such as Zerzan, as well as Ted Kaczynski, which you may know from Unabomber fame. And the primitivist mindset is most commonly seen in anarcho-primitivism. And the reason I make this distinction is because you could be a primitivist but not an anarchist. And that is to say, you want to return to a primitive state of nature, but you don't actually believe in a horizontal society. You want that because you want to return to a place where, domination could reign and so on. But I'm not going to be really addressing that perspective as I'm trying to only address perspectives that I think are reasonable or feasible, ideological positions that are within the spectrum of reasonable ideas. That being said, anarcho-primitivism has got a lot of problems that I can see. And I think the issue arises from misunderstanding the role of technology. So the anarcho-primitivist, what they see is the advancement of technology, the progress seen within the technological sphere, has directly correlated with a progression of hierarchical power structures throughout history. And whereas I think that this is more correlation rather than causation, the primitivist definitely does not. The anarcho-primitivist believes that technology is fundamentally intertwined with the rise of hierarchy, and that insofar as we are not willing to eliminate technology, we are not willing to eliminate hierarchy, and that the only way we can return to anything approaching a horizontal society is by eliminating technology. And I'm not going to stop here. I'll at least proffer some of the arguments that they have, the reason why they hold this position. So it should be said, in this conception, their position is that our relation to technology is crucially determined by the form of that technology. That is to say, the technology has a fixed form, and in having this fixed form, it imposes upon us the necessary relations that allow us to use that technology. One that is very commonly used as an example is the clock. So most of us are pro-clock, I guess you might say. But the primitivist points out that the creation of the clock created a conception of the day, and more than that, in extension, far into the week and so on, it created a conception of the day which was quantized, where we knew the precise hour, we knew the precise minute, we knew the precise second we were in over the course of the day. And what that did was it created a new regime of work. It created a new way of us forming our days based around that system of hours and minutes and seconds and so on. So this conception then allowed us to be regimented into a labor force. They could say, they no longer said wake up when day breaks. They no longer said wake up when the rooster crows or something, right? They would now say wake up at precisely 8:30 a.m. Now they would say, you work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. This was a thing that could be known, it could be quantized. There was no wiggle room anymore. And in doing so, the clock sort of created this inevitable march of the procession of time that we were now bound by. There was no way for us to escape now the quantization of time. There was no way for us not to know that it was 3 p.m. And therefore, no longer could we escape what was required of us as per what time it was. And I know that for a lot of people, this probably kind of sounds like silly, right? It's like, why does it matter that it's 3 p.m.? But of course it does matter, because in a time where labor was not regimented in this extremely strict way, where we knew precisely what time of day it was possible that labor could instead be formed around different bounds. Oh, when this task is fulfilled, that means it's time for everybody to go home. Like I gave the example of, you wake up when the sun rises, or, take, for example, say you're on a farm. You wake up when the sun rises in order to get out there and do the work. But there was nothing telling you that you had to work until some specific time. And this then created a society of the clock, you might say, right? So I've gone on in extensive detail here with the clock because what I'm hoping to do is just give you an idea of what I'm saying when I say primitivists view technology as establishing these fixed relations which we are then victim to. Okay? And this goes for all kinds of technology. Okay, different kinds of technology will regiment our lives in different ways, is what they would say, right? The creation of the plow now makes it to where we can achieve what the plow achieves. We are now, in a way, connected to the plow. We are tethered to it. We need it in order to do these things that it provides to us. So that is sort of the primitivist conception of technology. And of course, there's a lot more to say about that. There's a lot more within their critique, which could be said. There's lots more examples which could be given. We could go back and talk about the earliest implementation of technology, talk about how it was coordinated with hierarchical power, and so on. But I said I wanted to present two viewpoints that I disagreed with. And the other one is this conception that technology, the development of technology, is just an absolutely unqualified good. It's basically the exact opposite, right? If primitivism was technology bad, then productivism is I use this sort of like broadly, but I'll get into the details what I mean here. Productivism is technology good, right? So what do I mean by productivism? Well, I'm mostly referring to this sort of Marxist conception that the means of production, which is to say all of the infrastructure, the buildings, the mode of transportation and so on that we use in order to carry out production, these are called the means of production. And that in Marxist ideology, the development of the means of production is what bridges us into the next stage of society. They believe that the development and orientation of the means of production tells you everything that you need to know about how society is going to function. So what they believe then is the next regime, the next economic regime, will be created by the advancement of the means of production, by the ability to produce more, to create more material plenty, to have tools that expand our manpower further, and so on. So, this idea kind of makes sense in a way. The idea is they're looking at it and they're saying, Scarcity is somewhat easier to enforce when there is some scarcity of resources, or wherein it's not obvious that the resources there's been an artificial scarcity imposed upon them. There is this regime of labor is able to continue because there is not this enormous surplus of goods and things. And that will be produced as our technology, or the means of production more broadly, improves and expands. Okay? Their idea then is that as productivity expands, as the means of production improve, then what you would see is you would see production to the scale of need. And as this took place, you would then either, there's two different conceptions, which I won't go into huge amounts of detail here. Either the workers would be able to seize that directly and now have means of production that were so developed that it would be easy to socialize, or you would need to go through a developmental regime wherein the state controlled the means of production and tried to develop them forward so that you could do socialism or you could do communism. Okay? So I consider these two sort of like radically different perspectives. I think these are almost like the polar opposites within the radical or revolutionary Overton window, you might say. These are like the two polar opposites of this perspective. And what I want to provide is a completely different way of looking at this. And I think it's really important for us to instead think about how technology can be liberatory or oppressive based on how it is oriented in society, how society has control over that technology, and recognizing as well something about the fundamental structure of that technology. And that might seem like a big mouthful. It's kind of a bigger thesis to explain. But it's the thesis of Murray Bookchin in much of his work. So let me explain what I mean by what I just said. I think it is important for us to try to avoid the reductive conception of technology, either seeing technology as being universally good or universally bad. And what that requires is for us to work out what capacities about technology are good or bad. So what Bookchin really wants to bring our attention to is that one of the most important components that determines whether a technology is good or bad is actually it's a placement within a social matrix. What kind of society is it placed inside of? That's one of the most important things for Bookchin. Okay? Because if you have a technology that is embedded in a highly oppressive society, that technology is going to be wielded in an oppressive way. And if you have a technology that is embedded in a horizontal society, that technology at least has the capability of being wielded in a different kind of way, in a liberatory way. So, but you'll remember there's that second detail I brought up, okay? And that is we also still need to understand something about its form. So think about the fact that, the anarchist conception, as hopefully I've belabored in this channel, is focused around trying to localize control over society. It's trying to bring control back to the masses of people. It's trying to decentralize power, which is to say it's trying to put power back in the hands of human beings, of the masses of human beings, okay? So here's the thing. If you have a technology that is built in a highly oppressive way and you give it to a liberatory society, it's not going to just magically be not oppressive. And let me use an example of, for example, nuclear energy. Okay, so nuclear energy. There is a lot of opposition to nuclear energy on the left. And this is partially because of historic reasons, which is to say there was a big anti-nuclear movement, which was very much spearheaded by leftists. But it's also because there really are some practical concerns with nuclear energy. Now, I've said before that I am formally trained in physics. That's what I got my degree in, and that's where the highest level of expertise I have is. And so I am definitely not anti-nuclear. I want to preface this by saying that. I actually think there's a great deal of promise in nuclear energy if it is utilized correctly. And that's precisely the crux of what I'm trying to get at here, and what I think Bookchin is trying to get at as well, is that if nuclear energy, the technology, the conception of the idea that we have of nuclear energy, is marshaled in these massive power plants that produce energy for enormous sectors of society, then it is inherently going to lend itself to authoritarianism. Or when I say authoritarianism, what I mean is alienation of the masses from power. Power being held in the hands of very few people. More authoritarianism means more monopoly of power in the hands of a very small number of people. The smaller and smaller number of people it becomes, the more authoritarian it is. So if what you have is nuclear energy that is being created in these massive power plants, and there's only just a few of these power plants in an entire national infrastructure, then of course it's going to lend itself to central control. You've monopolized the access to nuclear power. So if what you want is a nuclear power that is actually able to be controlled by the masses, that has some liberatory potential, that is anti-authoritarian, you might say, it is to say you would want to create miniature reactors, reactors which are much smaller in scale. You'd want to create reactors that, many of these reactors over the course, through all of these municipalities, through all of these local regions and so on, so that people had direct control over the implementation of that nuclear energy. So this gives us some conception of how the form is related to how it is embedded in a social matrix, how its form is important in understanding what its potential is, but also in understanding that its form will have to take a particular kind of form in order to be used by particular kinds of societies. This doesn't mean, of course, that we've eliminated the limitations of its form. Nuclear energy still has serious problems, one of which being the disposal of nuclear waste. So I probably don't have to belabor the point very long on this, but disposal of nuclear waste is very challenging with nuclear reactors. Now, there are fissionable materials such as thorium, which are way better on the waste that they produce, that also cannot melt down, for example. So I just have taken that off the table as part of a discussion because modern reactors don't melt down. That's not a problem. There are fissionable materials which can prove this, but you'd still be stuck disposing of nuclear waste. Well, let's talk about that. In a society where the disposal of nuclear waste is understood and determined by a very small group of people, by a very small group of technicians and administrators and so on, and the decisions about where and how it is disposed of is held in the hands of a very small group of people. What you're going to find is that those who don't have power in society are going to be the ones who are impacted by disposing of that waste. So that waste is going to be, disposed of in places where very poor people or people who don't have power will be impacted and everyone else will not be. That's generally one of the things you will find will take place. You will also find that the disposal of waste in a hierarchical society is very short-sighted. And that's because hierarchical societies tend to be very short-sighted, especially capitalism. So under capitalism, there's this extreme tendency to think very short-term, not to think long-term. And therefore, nuclear waste is like precisely the sort of issue capitalism is not capable of dealing with. It requires capitalists to think in the long term. Okay, and capitalism pervades all of these systems. So even if it's not a capitalist making the decision about where to discard the nuclear waste, capitalism infects all the incentives and disincentives and decisions that are made within society. And what we find is that This leads to short-term thinking, and short-term thinking, it makes the disposal of nuclear waste much worse, because nuclear waste takes a very, very long time to become neutral again, to become not waste, and to degrade into something that is safe to go back into the environment. Now, let's contrast this to the concept of us having a bunch of these more miniature reactors that are in a bunch of localized places, okay? In this situation, what we would find is there are going to have to be solutions found to the problem by the people who are affected, because we've distributed power in this society. We've made it to where the masses have power. Well, that means that any person that could possibly be harmed by the disposal of that waste is going to be very unlikely to just let themselves be harmed. They actually have a say in how that waste will be disposed of, where it will be disposed of, what will be done. And what that means is it's not likely that that nuclear waste is going to be disposed of in the backyard of just some person who doesn't have a lot of power, because everybody should have power in an anarchist society or in a horizontal society. Therefore, those people are going to be part of the planning process, part of determining how and where waste will be disposed of. And just foreseeing objections, what I'm saying here is not that the masses of people who know nothing about nuclear waste or nuclear reactors should, run the reactors every single day and go and change rods out and blah, 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 and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that when the decisions are made in a broader sense about where will the nuclear waste go, for example, people will have a say in that. It's not to say they may not delegate experts to try to, deal with the nuclear power plants that are in their area. It's not to say that there might not be some people whose work is managing and maintaining those nuclear power plants. It is to say that people have power to change the way things are directed in a horizontal society. So there's another example, but there are also just like some pretty simple examples. Okay, technology it has a lot to do with also how a technology is used, depending on whether it is like quote unquote good or bad. Okay, take the firearm. The firearm is something that when it's in the hands of oppressors is clearly bad. Okay, the oppressors are going to use it in order to threaten and exact violence upon us, the masses, especially if the time were to come that we were to ever actually try to resist that power structure. And so therefore, in their hands, firearms are bad. But in the hands of the people, the hands of either in defending themselves from tyrannical governments or in themselves carrying out some kind of coup, we could see how firearms would be considered good. The firearm itself is not the bad guy. The firearm has a very particular form. It is limited to, for example, firing a projectile from itself, and therefore it is built to kill or to hurt other human beings. But who is killed, who is hurt, and under what conditions determines whether that is good or bad. Now, let's take another example where it's a little more, it's uncontroversially kind of in the opposite direction. The nuclear bomb. So the nuclear bomb is something that I think most of us recognize. We almost wish it had not been discovered, right? It has only done harm in the world. And to this day, there are really only examples of harm we can understand from the creation of the nuclear bomb. So the nuclear bomb, pretty uncontroversially bad. Do we want a society without nuclear bombs? Yes, it would probably be preferable. The amount of destruction it can do, there's no reason to want to do that amount of destruction purposely, not to other human beings. I mean, perhaps like an asteroid or something. And it is an enormous burden to conceive that something might be done with it accidentally or under some form of buffoonery, right? Which has actually gotten close to happening before. So it is almost just by its form bad, okay? However, one will note the underlying technology, which is to say fissionable materials and fissioning materials and creating nuclear chain reactions, well, that just harkens right back to our discussion just a moment ago about nuclear energy. But nuclear energy was complicated. It was good and bad and had to be embedded in a social matrix in particular ways and so on and so on. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about this being actually quite complicated. And what we have to do is we have to understand the form of the thing. What is its inherent form, and how does that change, how it has to be approached, and how is it embedded in a social matrix? So getting back a little bit to this concept of the social matrix that I was discussing, Bookchin really wants to emphasize that it's about trying to take technology and make it what he calls human scale. Okay? And this may seem kind of arbitrary, or it may not be clear what he means by human scale. He doesn't actually mean literally the size of humans. I'll say that right off the bat. What he's talking about is a scale that humans can actually grasp and interact with. What we've done is we've built sort of mega structures throughout society, such that no one person really can grasp in mind everything about how this whole structure functions. And what that means is that structure is no longer sort of apprehendable and controllable at the human scale. And for some technologies that will represent making it smaller, nuclear energy was our previous example. For some technologies that will be represented in making it more legible, perhaps making it to where we can see all of these flows and understand them through some mechanism that would be available to us. For example, visualizations of Republican voting systems, and I mean, of course, like of the Republic, not the Republican Party. When we look at like vote tallies and how they've all been figured up, and we're watching that the night of, that is not something that past peoples got to have before the invention of all these technologies. So that helped us understand this megastructure of the Republic a little better. And so that might be another example of how you might try to make something human scale. But for Bookchin, this is also important for another reason. It is when we become alienated from the ecology, it is when these structures become so megastructural, when they become so big we no longer grasp them, that we begin to become distanced from nature, that we begin to harm nature. And one will notice that these megastructures and this alienation is coordinate with hierarchical power structures. And so this is all kind of linked together. If we wish to create an ecological technology, if we wish to create liberatory technologies, technologies which can be embedded in a social matrix that allows us to control our world, they have to be human scale. And they have to be human scale so that we can return to some amount of ecological integration, so that we can control our interaction with nature. That we don't have to trust to a small group of administrators and hierarchical figures at the top of the structure. And that is crucially important if we are actually going to repair our relationship with the ecology. And one will note, this was already sort of echoed in my previous example of nuclear power and the disposal of waste. One will notice that in the current day, waste is disposed of in incredibly dangerous ways, in ways which are highly dangerous to the ecology. We're not even considering the ecology in this process. With many of these huge projects that are carried out, they do an environmental impact study that they either disregard, they don't seem to care about at all, especially in the case of corporations, or which they just essentially throw their hands up and say, well, that's all we got, can't do any better than that, sorry, that's an unfortunate fact, but we're going to move forward, right? And that is a symptom of being disconnected from the ecologies which will be impacted, disconnected from the outcomes of that decision and how it will actually harm people and the ecology. It is only when these technologies are made able to be understood and controlled by humans writ large, and I don't mean 2 humans or 3 humans in an ivory tower or behind a control panel. I mean by the masses of humans, that we will be able to reintegrate with the ecology. So, I, as usual, have run out of time. I always wonder, am I going to be able to, am I going to be able to go on for the length of the video? And then every single time here it comes, end of the video comes rolling around and I'm still going. But I hope that provided at least a good summary for you. I'd like to remind you, if you like my channel, if you like these videos and you want to help the channel grow, you want to give me more time to work on these, go over to my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch. It'll also be down in the description, and maybe it'll also be like up here. Did I point right? Yeah, something like that. If you go become a patron, it helps me an enormous amount. Every one of you that becomes a patron, I get to spend more time on the channel. I have to do less odd jobs on the side. I have to spend less time doing a part-time job on the side. So I hope you enjoyed the video. As usual, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, go comment below, tell me what your thoughts are. The video, I'm already doing these Anarch-Abridged videos over topics that y'all have suggested. So go suggest things in the comments if you can think of anything, and I'll give priority to patrons. So if you go become a patron, I will take those patron suggestions first. But I hope y'all enjoyed that. And I'll see you next time.